privatization experience. We'll also have the opportunity to review the Romanian privatization program, as well as meet some of the potential and prospective issuers. And we'll also look at some of the views of institutional investors. Today's session will be very interesting, perhaps even more interesting than yesterday's. So I'd now like to invite you to listen to the first panel of the day. It's called the Privatization Strategy, Polish Experience. And the following persons will be taking part: Paweł Tamborski, the Secretary of State from the State Treasury Ministry; Mr. Sławomir Panasiuk, who's a member of the Securities Depository; Mr. Krzysztof Zawadzki, the Vice President of Tauron Polska Energia; and then Mr. Paweł Klimkowski from Aviva PTE; and Mr. Grzegorz Chłopek from ING OFE. And the moderator will be Mr. Krzysztof Walenczak from Société Générale. And I'd like to invite all of you to listen to the discussion that will now take place. I'd like to welcome all of you. We're thinking now about the topics. We've been thinking about the linguistic issues. In which language should we conduct our discussion? And this is a symptom of time of the globalization in the Polish economy and the Polish market rules and the importance of the growing importance of the center. So this would suggest that the discussion should take place in the English language as well. So I'm going to allow myself to speak to you in two languages. I'd like first to welcome everybody in Polish, and above all, I'd like to welcome all of my colleagues, my distinguished colleagues, the panelists. And we have a very interesting composition in this panel when we talk about the capital markets and the role of privatization in the process of building these markets. So we have all of the participants in this process. So we have the providers of capital, suppliers of capital, so the leaders of this market, the pillars of this market in the form of open pension funds. We have also the state treasury as probably the most important market maker on the Warsaw capital market. We also have representatives of the infrastructure, so this is the National Securities Depository, and on top of that we have a representative of an entity which is an entity that was privatized, a commercial entity, Tauron, one of the most interesting privatization cases. Some 1.5 years ago, and who joined the WIG 20 index very quickly and has become one of the more important entities on the Warsaw Stock Exchange. So I think we have a very interesting discussion in front of us.
Polish, I'd like to address really quickly in English for those that might not have fully functioning translation devices. Indeed, a very intriguing discussion ahead of us. We're talking about privatization, Polish experience, the way privatization, the role that privatization played in creation of capital markets in Warsaw. We're going to share regional experiences. And indeed, for this very discussion, we have all the right type of participants, namely every particular unit in the value chain, if you will, of capital markets is represented here, from capital givers, represented by Polish pension funds, through capital takers, namely state treasury, all the way with infrastructural institution, namely depository, and one of the privatized, one of the companies that has been privatized and is now member of the WIG 20 equity index, which is Tauron. I'd like to welcome all the guests, and I'd like to welcome you, gentlemen. Proszę Państwa,
So in the region, we talk about the Polish privatization model. And it's interesting that this term is in operation outside of Poland. When I talk with many representatives of different countries in Central and Eastern Europe, it's interesting to hear this term, the Polish privatization model. So I'd like to start with a question to Minister Tamborski for him to explain what this Polish privatization model entails. Thank you very much. I'd like to add to this introduction of panelists, if we mention Krzysztof Walenczak is today at Zasady General, but he was the person who led me to this new profession, so a government official. Previously, he was responsible for privatization to some extent. He should respond to that question, but I'll try to present perhaps our vision of privatization, what the assumptions are for this process. And let me start with perhaps why we're doing this. It's not just to procure budgetary proceeds from privatization for the state. Of course, this is important, but it's not the most important thing. And over time, this goal, this objective, will be much less important than it once was. What we know is that according to the budgetary assumptions, the state treasury would like to procure some 10 billion PLN and 8 billion PLN from dividends. So we can see that the structure will change. This composition will go in the direction of capital gains as opposed to transaction proceeds. We're perhaps not at the end of the path here, but in a certain sense, we are ending the privatization process in our country. The state treasury is undergoing a transformation from a transaction entity to an asset manager whose task will be to manage or at least care for these assets where decisions have been made or will be made, that they will remain under the control of the state treasury. This is one of the most important things for privatization and why we're privatizing. It's a very important part of transforming the Polish economy. It's our assumption that outside of the strategic institutions, the companies currently owned and controlled by the state treasury should become privately held entities, with the exception of those companies on the list of the most material, most important companies from the point of view of the state treasury. These are infrastructural entities like the Polish power grid. We have other companies like Poland's largest power or utilities, which, according to our government, should remain under the control of the state treasury. Some of the most important financial institutions in PZU and PKBP should remain under the corporate control of the state treasury. Well, how are we privatizing? Well, we're open to investors, we're transparent, and we operate according to market standards. That's very important. And we rely on several key documents, sector documents, government assumptions, and another important document that defines the pace of privatization. This is a government document, which is the privatization plan. Right now, we're working under the privatization plan for 2012, 2013. We have several hundred companies under this privatization plan. But having the tough market conditions in mind, this document is quite flexible in terms of the timing and the form for running these transactions. I'm talking when we have methods of transaction, we have two major methods. In our office, we call it industrial privatization, which is outside the capital market, where it's important to have a transfer of capital, transfer of know-how, transfer of experience and technology. That's what's important. This applies more to smaller companies. So of the 270 companies that are in the privatization program, most of them are being privatized within the framework of this industrial privatization. With respect to the larger companies, we want to use the capital markets, so IPO, and it's our objective, and I'd like to underline here, so it's our mission as well as our objective, is to grow the capital markets. Price in these transactions is important, but not the most important thing. We're interested in the growth of the capital market. We want to be able to offer the shares of our companies to domestic investors and international investors, and we also want to offer them to retail investors in Poland. So privatization through the capital market is very important, and we're a sponsor and moderator of a program which we call citizenship shareholding. This program was launched in 2010, and we have a number of financial institutions working as our partners, also industrial organizations, which are supporting the education of our citizens, and they're promoting the privatization program. And an important success achieved or outcome of this program is the fact that our citizens are participating quite extensively in the transactions run by the State Treasury. The largest number of retail investors participating in our IPOs was 350,000 individual investors who submitted subscriptions and elected to invest in the shares of companies being privatized. And I think it's an impressive figure, not only here in Poland, but when we talk with international partners, they're also impressed by these figures. So it's important to strengthen and bolster the capital markets, and we want to ensure that Poland continues to be a financial hub. The stronger the capital markets are, the stronger Poland is. And so Polish entrepreneurs and Polish companies need to have access to capital on the capital markets, on the stock exchange. And I think this is one of the reasons underlying the success we've achieved, why the country continues to be a green island on the economic map of Europe. The State Treasury was and is initiator of new trends. We've been trying to open the market. In February, we did the largest transaction on the market in February of this year, where we sold 7% of PGE, the Polish energy group. This was a very important transaction to open up the capital market, the regional market, for transactions of, including new issues. Thank you, Paweł. I'd like to thank you for two things: for a very clear vision of the actions being taken by the State Treasury, but at the same time, that you were so nice to mention my modest person, that we were working together. I was wondering if you were mentioning me to say that we have an opportunity to create the Polish economic system, or is it gradually the fact that you started to understand that how much you're actually earning? So I'm not sure if this was a good reason or a bad reason, but in any case, thank you very much for your commentary. So the state's contribution to the development of capital markets, whether it was a positive or a negative contribution, I'd like to pose this question to the most well-known critic of the criticizer of the state's actions, and this is Mr. Grzegorz Chłopek. So I'd like to ask him for his opinion. After this type of introduction, perhaps I should use the list that I have prepared that won't deviate from this commentary, but I'd start with the positive elements, because I think privatization has contributed strongly to the development of the capital markets. And I think I should say that most of the companies in VIG20 come from that process, or where the State Treasury continues to have major stakes. That means having in mind the control